Today I'm going to show you one approach to forging a pair of tongs without an extensive shop. So for this demonstration I'm basically just going to be using my hammer and anvil. I'm not going to be using my vise, and I won't even be using the hardy hole or the Pritchel hole of my anvil, or the horn for that matter. So if you just have a square block of steel, a hammer, and absolutely no experience, you can make these tongs, and they are usable tongs. The material I'm using today is a 24-inch piece of 1/4 by 3/4 flat bar. In addition to not needing any specialized equipment, each tong blank is folded out of the flat bar, so you don't even need to know how to move metal at this point to make these tongs. Now, when you need to get a ballpark figure for the total length of a piece that's folded up, one of the best ways of doing that is to mock it up with a piece of wire. This won't be an exact measurement, of course, because it doesn't account for the thickness of the metal, but it will get pretty close, and certainly good enough for what we need today. So really all I'm doing here is just going through the process of what I'm going to be doing to forge these tongs. And then once I decide how long I want the handles, I'll cut the wire to length. Now these might seem like short handles, but this is the tong blank with just a square cut piece of flat bar. Once I forge out the reins, that will add another 3 or 4 inches to the total length. But forging out the reins is optional. You'll see later that even with a square cut flat bar handles, they're quite usable and easy to manage. And then by straightening the wire back out, you can determine the length of the flat bar that you need. I've calculated that it was roughly 12 inches, so I'm starting with a 24-inch piece. If you want both halves of the tongs to be fairly even, you are going to need a pair of calipers, but I don't think I really need to explain how to build these calipers. The first step in making these tongs is to hammer in a short bend right at the very tip of the bar. It doesn't really matter what size you make this, just try to make both halves of the tongs the same. Now here's where you're going to need your calipers. In the next heat you're going to be bending this bar over, and to make both halves of the tongs the same you do need to put that bend in pretty close to the same location. And this bent wire is a good example of how a lot of tools don't need to be really complicated. And I always double check a measurement to make sure that nothing moved out of position. The last bit of forging that I need to do on these tongs is to create that S bend that allows the two halves to lap over each other and create that tong shape. Here once again I'm using that bent wire simply as a guide to create this bend. Now you might think to yourself, these are butt ugly tongs and there's nothing you're going to be able to do about that, so why bother with this? But when you're learning, it's really important to work to a line or work to a measurement and develop that skill to allow you to work fairly accurately. And these projects where none of that stuff matters is a great place to do that, because if you wind up making a mistake, it's no big deal. It doesn't affect the performance of this particular piece, but it may at some point when you are forging something that is important, and that accuracy is something that you're going to try to get, and if you don't have the practice, it's going to be just outside of your grasp, and that's going to be very frustrating. I'm going to be punching the hole for the rivet. If you don't feel comfortable with that, there's no problem. You can drill it out. It really doesn't affect the strength of the tongs that much. The advantage of a punched hole is that you lose very little material because 99% of it is being pushed out of the way by the punch and the drift, whereas a drilled hole, the total diameter of that hole is gone from the metal. The reason I'm demonstrating it here is just to give you an option if you want to go that route, and to show that you really don't need the Pritchel hole of the anvil to punch a hole. There are other ways of setting it up. Here I'm just laying a couple of pieces of metal on the anvil so that I have enough clearance to knock the slug out of the punched hole that I just created. You could easily have this mounted to a block of wood or a sturdy sawhorse. As long as there's a gap there for the chisel to work through, you're going to be able to do this process. To drift the hole to the full size, I'm moving to a short length of pipe that's held upright with a C-clamp. So that's the basic process for forging the jaws. Of course, you'll need to do this at the other end of the bar and then cut the whole thing in half before you can finish the tongs. To complete the jaw blank, you need to put a rivet where the end of the folded bar meets the main part of the tongs. Here I'm just using a 16 penny nail, which is 3.5 inches long, as the rivet. It doesn't need to be much, it just has to give a little bit of stability to that part of the jaw. If you want to make a V-groove jaw, the process is the same, but you need to have a fold that's flattened right out. Originally for this video, I was just going to forge out a pair of flat bit tongs, and I thought of this after I had both halves of those tongs made. So you are going to see a rivet here in this half of the tongs, but if I was forging this correctly, I would do all the forging first and then rivet the piece when all the forging was done. Now to fuller the groove, I'm using a pair of locking pliers to keep the bit from just spreading out and not forging into a V shape. And then I have a short piece of square bar bent into a fuller, and then I'm just driving that into the surface. It actually does a pretty good job. Of course, if you have some kind of a vise, you don't need to do it this way. This is just to illustrate another option of getting the job done without a vise. So the tongs are basically done. Of course, I have two different jaws on this pair of tongs. That's why they're slightly different lengths. And I do have both halves of the tongs just bolted together. That allows me to take them apart if I ever decide I want to hammer out the reins into proper reins and not just leave them stubby and short like this. But even left like this, these are pretty good tongs. They'll certainly serve you well until you can find or make a proper pair of tongs for yourselves. Hi, I'm Dennis and thanks for watching. If you like this video, by all means give it a thumbs up. If you want to support this channel, you have a couple of options to do that. The first, of course, is to just subscribe. Secondly, if you have any suggestions or photographs of things you'd like to see on this channel, send them along and I'll do my best to turn them into a video. If you want to lend your financial support, you can do that in a couple of ways. First, if you're interested in making an ongoing contribution to this channel, just click the Patreon icon and it'll take you to my Patreon page, and you can donate whatever amount you feel comfortable with. If you want to make a one-time contribution, just go to my channel homepage and click the donate button in the banner. So thank you for your support, and with your help I'll be doing this for some time to come. I'll see you next time.